when you're painting, all the voices of the artists before you and your professors and everything are in the room with you. And if you're lucky, slowly, one by one, they begin to walk out. And if you're really lucky, you walk out too. I am Mark Phelan. I have been a maker and an artist since I was a little kid. I became a dad at 19, and that kind of delayed my art school track. And eventually my partner then and I had 3 kids together, and we're together for 17 or 18 years. So it wasn't until the kids were teenagers themselves and in high school that I felt like I had maybe a little extra time to go back to school for myself.
A lot of people say that young people usually have like a particular type of spirit that can only be conjured when they're young, especially in art, like the power to like go through a lot of things where like old people, usually these kind of feelings fade. So I was wondering like how this niche trajectory in your life has shaped how your art expression.
Yeah. I think if I hadn't experienced what I experienced and went to art school right out of high school, I think I would have blown it. I don't think I was ready for it. And I think for me, personally, I had to live a little bit before I came around again to the idea that I wanted art making to be central to my life, you know, and kind of build a life around making and teaching art. Some of that was sort of the fire just sort of staying lit for me for 17 years after high school, right? The fact that I still really wanted to do it when I was 35 was, it was like all the evidence I needed.
What is the reason for the grayish color and the incorporation of charcoals?
Line is big for me. I use line a lot, and I will pick up whatever is nearest to hand to create a line in a painting. And it might be an oil stick, it might be charcoal, it might be the paintbrush. These paintings here are part of a small series of 5 or 6 that I did a number of years ago. And I was deliberately trying to keep a relatively limited palette. So the black and white and gray was the only motivating factor for it, was not using a lot of color. A lot of my recent work is very colorful. So it was just kind of an experiment, you know.
How do you think this modern art history has influenced your work?
You know, I see things that motivate me in the work of artists like Richard Diebenkorn or Philip Guston or Robert Rauschenberg, or more recently, Amy Silman. I am motivated by stuff I see that, you know, it makes me ache a little bit, wishing that I could paint that way. And I don't necessarily intentionally try to paint like somebody else, but the way a person paints kind of reveals a lot about the way they think. And I try to take more away from the evidence given to me through painting about the way a person thinks. And I try to learn to think that way when I'm in the studio, but always react to a canvas or an idea the way that I would, you know. Philip Guston said something about how when you're painting, all the voices of the artists before you and your professors and everything are in the room with you. And if you're lucky, slowly, one by one, they begin to walk out. And if you're really lucky, you walk out too. And so the only thing left is just you working with no specific thought in your head, just the making. Like your whole being is like consumed by the making.
So when a good piece of art is exhibited in a gallery, or a gallery is cooperating with like an artist in a series, they usually have like a lot of meanings for each piece of work. And do you think these kind of meanings come from the galleries after they've seen the work, or do you think they come from the artist's effort in expressing themselves?
I think the need to put words to a painting is kind of, I mean, I understand why we do it, because expressing ourselves through language is like the best way we have of understanding each other, right? But I think it by nature limits how how a piece of work can be interpreted, because the painting wasn't made with words, right? And so to use words to describe it kind of does it a disservice, or at least it doesn't tell the whole story, you know? And so, I mean, when my work has been described, I think about interviews that I've done with people who have written about my work. And I express myself, and like what led me to make a certain body of work the way that I did. And I express myself in words the best way that I can. And then those words are interpreted by somebody else. And then the work is written about through that lens, right? So it's always going to be some kind of distortion. Or like if the person is, super earnest and trying to tell the truth, they're still telling the truth through their own lens, So it's always going to be only a partial story. I don't think it can ever be a complete story. But when a work goes on a wall for everybody to see, it's not really up to me as the painter how they see it. And that's okay, People are gonna bring their own experiences to it, whether they have a thing to read about it or whether they just see it in front of them and have to figure out an interpretation for themselves. It's always part of a dialogue.
So would you say trying to like send a direct and obvious message in a piece of painting is wrong in art?
No, I don't think it's wrong, but I think it's rarely going to be seen as you intended. It's rarely going to only be seen as you intended, No, I mean, you can have a very specific thing to say. I think sometimes that's good. My work isn't usually that, because I don't know what I'm trying to say before I make it. And it's only after I've made several things. I always work on several paintings at once. I think in the studio now I have something like 25 happening at the same time across like 3 different bodies of work. Like 3 different, overarching ideas. And I have more explicit ideas in one than I do in the others. But I'm always interested in seeing how other people react to them. Because, a snowstorm painting might mean something completely different to you than it does to me, than it does to somebody out there, right? And I can say something very specific about it without feeling bad about that, but it isn't the only way it's going to be interpreted.
If you have 2 paintings to choose from, like one is like a classic old like realistic painting and the other one is a modern art and like a very expressive but good piece of art, how do you how would you say which one is more artistic? Which one is true art in your opinion?
I think they both are, but what might be my favorite, I think, would sort of depend on how it was painted. I like paintings that look like they were painted. So you can see the brush strokes, so that there's some kind of like terrain to them because of the way the paint was put on. But there's some really classic stuff that is painted that way, right? One of my favorite painters is John Singer Sargent, and he paints very representational images of life from his time, right? But you zoom in super close, like to the pinafore on the girls in that painting that's at the Boston MFA, the daughters of Edgar Dowley Boy, or Bois. I don't know how you pronounce that guy's last name. But you take like a square inch or a few square centimeters anywhere on that canvas, and it's very abstract. There's super tightness, there's super looseness on top. There's like everything happening all at once in wherever you would put a square up to that. So like it was painted by a painter, and you could say the same thing made by Basquiat or Haring or whoever you wanted to pick. I think they're both good. I think they both reflect the time that they were made, and I think that, yeah, as long as it looks like it was made by a skillful hand, I'm there for it. It doesn't really matter.
How do you think our definition for what a good piece of art has changed?
I mean, it's within the context of what's happening in the rest of the world at the time that the art is made, right? And the things that are possible in making an artwork. I come at this stuff from a very hands-on maker kind of perspective. And so while I'm sure that there's like really great work being made with new media, it doesn't interest me all that much. But I don't judge it necessarily. I just don't pay a lot of attention to it. So I'm kind of like an old soul that way, and the stuff that interests me the most is stuff that was made by hand and uses materials and takes up space in the physical world and makes me travel to a place to see it in person, is kind of a monument to a time or an idea or whatever,
So, like, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, obviously our art has been changed, and like in the definition has been changed. And
Yeah.
do you think this is a good change or a bad change?
Well, like with Duchamp or somebody like that, where he takes a toilet seat and puts it on a pedestal.
It doesn't have to be like
makes it-
Duchamp or Catalan, but
Yeah.
like anything that like we now call something not realistic as art.
Yeah. Not realistic, like not representational.
Yes.
If it looks like it was painted well, I think it's great. Because it's,
Do you think this understanding of how art should be is shaped by by the age we live in? Or do you think it's our inherent nature to appreciate something as beautiful or not? In other words, if I'm in the 18th century and I see a modern piece of art, would I still appreciate it the same way I do in modern terms?
oh, I mean, I think certain artists are always on the cutting edge and pushing boundaries, right? And so, I mean, you could point to any number of painters. Maybe the most obvious one is Van Gogh, who, like, we think of now as a great painter, right? And in his time, people made fun of him. I think artists are often kind of ahead of the curve, and maybe the artists that are kind of cutting edge now and we don't necessarily like what they're doing are the people that are going to be like really revered 100 years from now.
So how do you know if someone is just being cutting edge or she's just being crazy? Like, for example, if I take a shit in a museum, would that be like a performed art or would that be just being illegal?
I think art has to be transformative in some way. And I think it needs to show a certain amount of skill, right? So if art shows skill at the hand of the person who made it, and it's transformative in some way for the viewer, then it's good.
So you're saying Catalan's like works are not good?
I mean, they are kind of transformative, though, right? Yeah, you know, I guess I hesitate to put out what I like or don't like in particular, only because a lot of art it's still contributed to the movement of how we view it, right? And if Catalan and Duchamp weren't there, like there is kind of a return to representational painting now, right? I mean, 60 years ago, people would have said it was dead. It would never matter anymore. But now it matters again. And some of that is like a decades-long reverse curve, right? Coming back around to the idea that, well, you know, maybe traditional stuff is always going to be valuable. Yeah, I don't know. I think it depends. It depends on how you look at it.
A lot of people have the controversy saying that, so like if I stick a banana on the wall myself, why do I not become famous? Why did Catalan become famous? So what's your opinion?
I mean, that is like I think that's an art market thing. And it, you know, the success of that was the marketing of it and not necessarily the piece itself.
What do you think is shaping the standard of art nowadays? Do you think market has more, or is it the art that values more?
Well, I mean, in terms of, you know, the international art market, I don't really pay a lot of attention to it because I'm not a part of it. So for me, it's about time in the studio. It's about using art making methods to work through ideas. And I don't think a lot about the monetary value of what the monetary value of something I make might be. That it just never even enters my mind.
Yeah. A lot of artists I've talked to don't really care about the monetary value, as they say. And do you think this is why like artists are poor, or do you think the art, like the expression itself, makes people poor?
I think it's because the the people that that work in like the international art market, it's not about the art, it's about the money, right? And the art is the thing that they happen to be selling to make the money. And there's a community of people who are super rich that view art as something collectible, you know? And there are probably artists that work in that world that think about those things. And maybe they have to, I don't know. But I've never been there, so I don't really think about it. I'm much more interested in art making as an intellectual and creative pursuit than I am about anything else. And so this balance that I have between the studio and the classroom, I don't know, kind of works for me.
Do you think rich people buy art just because they want to have something that others don't have to seem like more knowledgeable and artistic, or do you think they actually appreciate the values in art pieces?
I think it depends on the rich person. I think a lot of them do that. Yeah, they buy a painting at a low price, right? The artist that they've started collecting, the value of the work suddenly goes up, and then they donate that stuff to a museum. And so they bought it at $10,000, and they donated it to the museum when it's valued at $1 million, and they get to write off $1 million of tax liability for a $10,000 investment a couple of years ago, right? So there are those people. And then there are those people who do it because they love seeing paintings on their wall or love seeing sculpture in their hallway, you know? And there are probably people that sit on either side of that. Takes all types.
What would be some advice you would give to young artists who's planning to have an art career in the future?
I mean, it's tough. And so you have to be fired up to make your studio life important enough that the way you make money isn't necessarily attached to that, right? Or at least isn't necessarily attached to how you define yourself, at least as rigidly as a lot of people who go on to have careers doing whatever, right? American culture in particular, you know, the first question you ask a stranger when you meet them at a dinner party is, what do you do for a living? You know, like so much of a person's identity is wrapped up in how they make money. But that's really only one part of a person, right? So I think for a lucky few, there are some artists that get to make a living by being an artist. And I think for the rest of us, we have to decide how important it is, how important our studio life is, or our art making life is, and how to set up the rest of our lives to support that. You know, I have artist friends who are gardeners. I have artist friends who work at Starbucks. I have lots of artist friends who also teach. I have artist friends who are accountants and work in the theater at night, you know? There are lots of ways to solve that issue. I think it just kind of depends on the person. For me, teaching made the most sense because I get to have dialogue about the creative process with myself in the studio and with all my students in the classroom, right? And with my colleagues and stuff too. And so for me to be able to like live and breathe it, that's better for me than being an accountant or working at Starbucks or selling cars or whatever, right? But different things work for different people. So, and if I had the opportunity to spend a couple years just painting and I was going to make a living off of that, I would probably take that chance. But that opportunity hasn't really come my way. So I find other ways to make it happen. It is a hard way to make a living and make a life, There's no doubt about that. But if it's important to you, you figure out a way to do it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.